Now, the world as we know it is trying to make things very easy for mankind. Maybe over the past 50 to 60 years, uh, companies have always tried to make things easy in their products and their services. So you have umpteen number of apps, shopping for us, doing all the activities of our daily living. The only thing that we do is maybe go to work and come back home. There will come a time when even some of the basic things that we do on a daily basis is done by machines, right? Now, you think we'll get there? I think we'll get there in the next 20 years. Simply because companies have made things easy for us, all of our instincts, our innate instincts, have been severely blunted. I would say vasectomized. It might be a little harsh, but yes, they are severely vasectomized. Simply because we do not know our human potential. We are not exposed to it. Now, I have spent the last 24 years watching the sun rise, right? Very few people in this world watch the sun rise. I would say athletes, people who are involved in early morning jobs, usually see the sunrise. And everybody should start their day watching the sunrise. That is part of having a primal instinct. Now, there are 4 other instincts that we need to build and develop for the future, which will help us better adapt for what's coming for us. Not all of us know what's coming for us, but if you build these 4 instincts, it's going to put you in a better place. The most critical aspect of life is energy, and we get our energy through food. But the problem is we don't know how to recognize food. Not all of us know how to recognize food, simply because it is thrust upon us. There are 10 to 15 companies in the world which dictate 80% of what we eat, simply because we do not make the choice. The choices are made for us. The best way to recognize food is to see if it has a food label or if it has an advertisement. A food that requires an advertisement for it to sell is simply not good enough. That's why it's being advertised. So a lot of money is pumped into advertising the food, advertising its nutrition, but it's simply not nutritious. So the moment you see a food label or an advertisement, you try and stay clear. That's not your first choice. Now, the thing is, a lot of the food have food labels, right? How do we read it? You would see that most of the foods that we have added sugar. And in a simple drink that was served to me today, it had 13 grams of sugar in 100 ml. Now, 13 grams is a lot of sugar, right? Now, the body can assimilate just 3 to 4 grams of sugar every 100 ml. It's scientifically called a 3% sugar solution. Now, when we have a 12 or 13% sugar solution, just 3 grams is used up by the body as energy. Now, what happens to the remaining 10 grams? Is it used up? Yeah, if you're sitting and listening to a person talk, it's probably not used up. But if you are exercising, then maybe it's used up. It's again very subjective. But in most cases, it's not used up and it's stored. And again, in most cases, it's stored as fat. Now, this is just a simple example that I'm giving you of one of the processed foods that we are all exposed to, processed juice, fruit processed juice. Now, do we avoid that or do we drink it? If we drink it, there are certain things that will happen to our body which are quite harmful. If we choose to adapt, because probably that's the only food that you have for that day. That's the only accessible food that you have for that day. How do we make it, how do we be adaptive about it? We try and we want to dilute that juice. So if you dilute that juice to maybe, if you add 300 ml to that juice, it's going to become a 3 or 4% solution, right? And that is going to be easily assimilated by the blood and will be distributed to whichever organs need that energy. Similarly, where do we procure that food? If you go to a market, typically a lot of us, as of now, go to supermarkets. And you will find real food only in the entrance or the perimeter of the supermarket. You will never find it in the shelves because all the food that is stored in shelves have a food label. So that is not food again. So you will need to shop predominantly from the perimeter of a supermarket. Now compare this to an open market. An open market, everything is in the outside, it is exposed to the atmosphere. And what happens at the end of the day, if I'm a vegetable vendor and I have 100 kgs of tomatoes at the start of the day, and by the end of the day, I sell maybe 60 kgs. What do I do with the 40 kgs of tomatoes? I export it to the La Tomatino festival in Spain, or I purge it because it's not usable anymore. It's been exposed to the natural environment for the whole day. So it's going to decompose and it's not usable. So they dispose it. And what happens the next morning? They get some fresh stock, right? So if you go to an open market every morning, and I'm sure in a country like India, this generation, including me, almost despise open markets simply because, oh, it's very untidy, it's not properly maintained. But if we happen to go to Turkey or some other country, open markets are the only places where we're going to shop, right? Because open markets in Turkey are written about. There are articles all over the internet about the Turkish markets. But it's a very, very healthy choice to shop from open markets. Not only are you shopping for real food and you're procuring real food, but you're also shopping local produce. Because everything that you get in the open market is locally sourced food. It's locally grown. So there is very little cost of production involved. They spend very, very less on transport as opposed to you getting food from a global source. Now, we also need to try and figure out how much of it, can we stick to? How much of these rules that I'm talking about can we stick to? We can't stick to it all the time, right? Someone earlier this morning was asking me about how many times can I have biryani per week. I mean, I have a weakness for biryani. Now, biryani can be had almost every day. Yes? It can be had almost every day. 80% of the time, if you stick to these rules, you will be good. 20% of the times, you need to have unhealthy food because it's all around us. We cannot escape it. And it's also a good way for you to reinforce good eating habits if you have unhealthy food. So you can have your pizzas and burgers and fries and fried food and processed food. Notice how I don't place biryani as an unhealthy food. It is an healthy food, right? There's a lot of nurturing that goes into making biryani because it is a homely food. But the other stuff, you have it only 20% of the time. And what happens is, it helps you reinforce good eating habits. Food is a very innate skill. Animals recognize food and they often eat the right kind of food, but the humans still need to work on it, work on these aspects of recognizing food, procuring it from the right source, and also ensuring that 80% of the time you're eating the right food. Now, the second skill that is often overlooked is our sensory skills. The way we learn things from the environment, the way we learn things from other people. There are three ways in which people learn things. Visual learning, where you see images and videos. A lot of us are visual learners because we see and learn. You have so many vivid imagery and videos on the internet, in books, that we tend to pick things off by just seeing them. Kinesthetic learners are people who want to feel or touch or move in order to learn something. Most athletes are kinesthetic learners. The rest of us are all visual learners. We are also at times a combination of visual and kinesthetic learners, simply because of what we're exposed to. Now, the third kind of learner is very, very rare, the auditory learner. That's simply because we don't listen. We just hear things nowadays. We don't really listen. If you listen, you will be an auditory learner. And this thought came about when I've been involved in coaching for the past 12 years. And I often figured that in the gym, some people would just stand and look at me. They wouldn't move an inch. They would just stand and look at what I'm saying, how I'm saying it, maybe look at the way my lips are moving, and if I'm demonstrating the movement or not. Now, these guys are the visual learners. There were some guys, if I happened to show, how to pick things off the ground, how to pick the weight off the ground, they would be doing the same thing along with me, right? Because they want to feel the movement. There were some guys who were doing all kinds of things, because they wanted to move and then feel the movement. Those are the kinesthetic learners. And there is a combination of these two. But I found a small margin of people were actually listening to me, listening to my instruction. And there was another instance where I told a junior coach when they asked me about why is it so important to develop this verbal ability. I told them that your livelihood depends on your body. So there might come a stage where you are amputated, you can't stand, you can only sit, you don't have your hands. Because most coaches, if you notice, if anybody has been to a gym or been undergoing some form of sports training, the coach is always moving the hand or showing the movement, but is talking very, very less, is giving very, very few verbal instructions. But a really experienced coach, a highly trained coach, will have exceptional verbal ability. And what happens is that no matter what, you can still give instructions and do the job and still earn your livelihood. Now, most of us require to train this auditory ability, and that can happen by writing more. So when you write, you're not only you're feeling the pain of writing. Not a lot of us write, as of now, we type a lot. But when you write, you're feeling it, you're seeing what you're writing, and you're also saying it as you're writing. And if you go back to school, I studied in the 90s. I was in school in the 90s. And we wrote a lot. We wrote and repeated. As we were writing, we kept repeating what we were writing. And that was really ingrained in the head. So the guys who write a lot, and it also explains why love letters in the 90s were more effective than now, because we wrote it. It came from using all of these three senses, and it was very, very effective. The third skill is the most important one, and I get questioned a lot. There is so much information about this third skill, the physical skill. How important is a physical skill? I would say not so important. People think it's very, very important. It's not so important. It's just another cog in the wheel. The first two, food and sensory skills, are way above your physical skill. But it is still important. Simply because your brain exists for just one reason, which is to cause muscular contraction. Just one function of the brain. And it does it through imagery. Now, if you happen to, if I tell you I'm wearing a blue skirt, what did you imagine? You immediately painted a picture of Abhinav wearing a blue skirt. It happened so quickly. The brain is so effective. And you also probably laughed at that thought, right? That is muscular contraction, the muscles in your cheeks, right? The brain is so quick, but its only one function is to, enable this muscular contraction. We often think that, you need a strong mind. Body is not so important. I come from a South Indian Brahmin family, so for me to get into the sports and fitness field, a lot of people look down upon me, right? But as I studied this science, I realized that the brain is very, very important, more important than the rest of the body, because it's like your control unit. But still, it exists for only just one function. Talking about muscles. Now, again, I experience this every day. I tell people, you need to build muscle. What image do you paint in your head? Maybe really big, muscular bodybuilder, and you're thinking, I don't want that. Who says I don't want muscles? I mean, muscles are like the only organ which enables you to perform your tasks. When you say muscle, don't think of visible and big muscle. We're thinking about the capacity of the muscle to perform work, which is again through contraction. So how do you improve this skill? Exercise is one option. And again, there are various types of exercise, but it's important to figure out what type of exercise is going to help you get better at that skill. You have functional exercise, which is going to help you increase function, and you have skill-based exercise, like gymnastics, which improves dexterity. 80% of the time, again, you spend time training your functional movements or functional exercise. 20% of the time, you try and build your dexterity by performing movements like gymnastics or playing a sport. And you will realize that you will build a physical skill which will translate into your activities of daily living. The fourth skill is sport. I tell a lot of people who come to the training facilities and athletes that I train, if you only spend time training, you will be fit for nothing. Right? You need to express your fitness either through sport or through some other pursuit. Now, the pursuit can even be dance. If you don't express your fitness, you will never know what your potential is. And there are many other skills that you can develop along with these 4 innate skills. Everybody has their chosen field of expertise. It can be civil engineering, it can be you being in the medical field, and that is a skill that you develop for your livelihood. But these 4 skills that you need to develop will just help you cause holistic development. And you might not have heard this before, but I suggest everybody becomes a jack of all and a master of one, which is your chosen field of expertise. Right? Thank you very much.